Hey everyone, it's Retro DM Ray. Hey, I wanted to come to you today and kind of show you from a top-down perspective, as best I could, kind of how we do our adventures as a family together when we just want to get together and do like a random adventure together, and all of us get to play around the table. In the last video, I let you know that I usually run most of the time. And so I don't get a chance to play very often. So this is a way for me to be able to play along with my wife and kids, so we can have these adventures together. And so if you like this kind of a content from my channel, as always, please like and subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. That's very helpful. Please see the various things that are in the links below the description of the video to support us on PayPal or join Patreon. We are gearing up to start a play-by-email campaign. It was going to be play-by-post, but it's easier to do play-by-email to get more descriptive and to tell a longer story. But you can check that out, and the link will be in the description as well. And today, just thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for all of the subscribers. We have gotten over 340 of you now, and that's just amazing to me, and I just truly am blessed, and I thank you very much for that. So if you like this stuff, please hang on, and I hope you enjoy the ride today. So the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how we do these adventures together, and I'm going to show you some of the tools that we use. Basically what we do is this is our family gaming experience, our family hex crawl or sandbox adventure, if you will. So what I mean by that is we will often start out in a particular village. It might be the village where our characters were originally born and raised, for example, or it might be a village where we just end up and start in with no real background other than that. After we generate our characters, we may generate our characters either using white box here, or we may even generate our characters using basic fantasy. Or we might do a mashup of the two together. I kind of like that. Whitebox has some simplicity in some areas that Basic Fantasy does not, so I like to cross that over. Whitebox has a simple D6 and D20 only system. That's the only two dice you ever use. Basic Fantasy adds a little bit more complex nature to it. Again, it's Basic Fantasy, so it's not much. So I like to combine these two things together. So that's generally how we would create our characters for the particular game. To get us started, but we will start in our particular village, and then we will just work our way through the adventure. We call these our tile adventures together, and you'll see here in just a moment why that is that way. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of the books that we use pretty heavily in our games. These are by Madeline Hale. They are Table Fables 1 and 2. And if we take a look inside of Table Fables 1, you can see the table of contents here. It has character generators, like part 1 is characters there, part 2 is items, areas, and then miscellaneous. And you'll notice in part 3 areas there is on page 47 weather. So the first thing we're going to do when we get started for the day is we're going to determine what the weather is like. So if we turn over to page 47, you can see here on these particular tables that you have the conditions on a 1d10, you have the temperature on a 1d6, you have the wind on a 1d4, the particular moon phase that you're in on a d8, you have a compass direction indicator there at the bottom of the page. So that gets you started on your weather. Now, also, these books are something that we use on a regular basis as well. They are by Matt Davids, and they are random tables 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they are very useful as well. I'll start with Random Tables book number 1. And you can see by the table of contents here, it has tables for names and ends and things, and encounters and events. And we will come back to this one for that encounters and events section there at the very bottom of your screen. If you see Random Tables book number 2, it has things like names for goblins, orcs, and kobolds. It has dungeons, items and things, people. That includes jobs, NPC reactions and non-combat encounters, reasons for a player to be absent for a session, as well as town names, which is incredibly useful too. Then random table number 3 book. It has fun stuff like inn names and names of knightly orders. It has desert and forest and road and woodland animals or encounters. It has items and things, foods and drinks. It also has epitaphs, quests, and dungeon effects, specifically dungeon health side effects. And then finally, book number 4, and it is elf names and halfling and dwarf clan names, underground encounters, fictional spices, items and things, trees, magic items, people, and characters. So these are all books that we're going to be using to actually get us going in our tile adventures. And really what it is you're going to do this in sandbox style. And like I said, you're going to start out in your village, and you're going to roll your weather for that day. And then what we do is that there is a 25% chance that any given starting weather of that day could change into another weather event, depending on what makes sense at the time. So for example, if it's cloudy that day, then there's a 25% chance that that cloudy could turn into a rainstorm or maybe even a thunderstorm, and that might be indicated because that would make sense, right? So that's how we do our weather. So we'll start off our weather that day, and then we will actually use Basic Fantasy has some tables in here. It is, I believe it's after the monsters. No, apologize, give me a second here and I will find where I'm going. Okay, so you see here that you have the wind conditions chart right here. This gives you wind direction and then wind conditions. We might use that chart. We would also use a wilderness movement rates chart, just as an example. Then if you go over here, well, I'll get back to that here in a minute. I'm sorry. What you do is you roll your weather for that day, and then you will determine whether or not that weather is going to shift. Then you're going to determine the particular type of terrain that you started out in when you left your village. And for that, I would use the D30 companion. Now, I do not have a physical copy of that. I only have that in PDF form. But the D30 companion would give you an indication as to what your terrain type might be. The other way that you could generate that, if you did not want to use Donjon to do that, is if you go into your first edition Player's Handbook and you turn over, starting on page 184. Starting on page 184, you will notice that at the top of the Random Monsters Encounters table, you would have things like subarctic conditions, temperate and subtropical conditions, uninhabited wilderness area. Okay, and then at the top of there, you also have plain, scrub, forest, rough, desert, hills, mountains, or marsh. So you could also use this table and generate on a D8, for example, what is the terrain type that you are traveling through? Is it a plain, a scrub, a forest, a rough, a desert, a hills, a mountains, or a marsh? And that would be an example of how you might generate what type of terrain it is that is just outside of that village as you begin to travel. So you would generate your terrain type as you get started from the village. And then what we do is I do the classical 6 to 8 miles per hex as we travel. Of course, if you're traveling on a road, then the travel is a little bit quicker than that. Or a little bit shorter distance than that, I should say, because roads, the way that they're cut from one place to another, it's easier to travel on those roads than it is on the wilderness. And so if you look in the BFRPG book, you will discover that they have outdoor movement tables. Also in White Box here, they also have a tables for movement. And here's the particular table of contents for this particular book. And on page 32, you will see that they talk about outdoor movement rate. Base movement rate is in miles per day, but can be doubled during a forced march. For outdoor combat movement rates, take the base rate divided by 3, multiplied by 10 yards. For example, a base movement rate of 9 normally allows 9 miles of travel per day. So that's what I say that you can do when you're on a road. If you're in the wilds or the wilderness, then it could be half of that or even less, depending on how thick the wilderness is. So that will indicate how many hexes that you could then travel as you're moving away from the village. Now, to go back to the village for a second, when you're in the village, maybe you decide you want to start out with some idea in mind, and you're not just going to Sandbox Explore, but today we're going to actually generate for ourselves a quest that we are on. So again, Table Fables 2, The World Builder's Handbook by Madeline Hale. You're going to open that up, and here on page 9, you're going to see this section. It's a D100 table for quests. So let's say you might roll a 42. So here on this particular table, your quest might be that your party is hired as part of a disaster relief team after a pair of battling wizards destroy half of a town. All right, so in this particular case, you're a disaster relief team. So actually your hex crawl would be a city crawl and a quest for around a town and maybe to another village to gather resources, to indicate the way in which you could help to rebuild that particular community. Maybe it's that you're going on a chase after these wizards in their battle and their minions. So you could extrapolate a long ways from that. And that's something that we do just as general discussion around the table. So that's one option for you where you could get started on a quest. There's also, I believe it's in one of Matt David's books. And I believe yes. So this table, although not quests, could be side treks that you would be fun to do around the table. These are called jobs. This is page 28 of Random Tables 2. And so you might roll like a 33. So this job might be to go to the underworld and bring someone back from the dead. Yikes. So you might either want to be pretty high level, or that underworld word can be interpreted in many different ways. It could be the actual underworld, or it could be an underground place. And it could be bringing someone back from the brink of death. It could be bringing actually someone back from the dead by returning him to the village cleric or the temple. So those can be interpreted in various different ways as well. For example, like number 47 is a great one to do a hex crawl across the wilderness from one village to another. It says to transport goods for a merchant to another town. Okay, so those are different ways in which you could get yourself started, and that we get ourselves started as we do our tile adventures. So then once these things have gotten started, then as we begin to quest out, we're going to roll for a particular encounter as we're going along. Now, if you use white box, you'll see on page 73 through 77, you'll see encounter tables. Okay, so underworld encounter table by dungeon level will be up here, and then that would indicate your encounter level down below. If you're not in a dungeon level, then you're going to come over here and do wilderness encounter tables by terrain type. Again, this would be a way in which to generate the terrain type as you travel. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so you're going to generate a random number from 1 to 7. How would you do that? Easily, 2d8 minus 1. That gives you a number of 1 to 7. So you might roll that and say, the terrain type right around this village is hills and mountains. Okay, now we rolled an encounter, which I roll an encounter as if you are in just the general areas that you're traveling on, roads or something nearby the village. I will roll a 1d6, and on a 1 or a 2, it might indicate an encounter. And then if you're in the real wilds and dangerous areas, like off the roads and those kinds of things, then it would be a 1, 2, or 3 on a d6. Okay, so that's one way that you can generate an encounter. Another way you can generate an encounter is, again, going back to Table Fables 2, right? Wilderness and Travel, Chapter 2. So we're going to indicate something starting on page 19. So here on page 19 in the book, Wilderness and Travel. Nice little line art drawing there. I like that. Gets you a little bit of inspiration as to get your thought processes going. So then you might say, well, we're traveling from one village to the next. So roll a d6. What kind of road is it? Is there any activity on the road? Then how safe is that road? Right there on that chart on a d6. Then an encounter table. Great if you're traveling. So you have uneventful. This is on a d20. A road event or encounter, an NPC encounter, an enemy encounter. You take a fork in the road or someone else and you actually get lost, or your party is hungry. And by the way, indicating that we make sure that we track all of our resources, water and food in a given day, and we do check marks. So we say this day passed, you used this much of your resources, mark that off of your particular character sheet. And when we get low on resources, then we have to do hunting, or we have to find things throughout our adventures. Maybe rivers or streams for fresh water or anything like that. Maybe we have encounters with creatures and they have supplies on them and we take those supplies, whatever it might be. We encounter a merchant traveling on the road back to the village that we came from, and so we buy things from those particular merchants or what have you. But resources are incredibly important. So if it says party is lost, that's a big deal for your party as far as resources are concerned, and party is hungry, of course, would indicate that you were going to stop and have a meal. At which point, when you stop and have that meal, depending on how much of a meal that is, you would again roll for a random encounter at that given moment because you've now stopped. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what's going on there and how you roll those. So you'll roll over on this table, and if you do have a road event and an encounter, you roll on percentile dice. And let's say you roll a 57. The characters encounter a woman who's been securely tied to a tree after the townsfolk noticed her drinking problem. The woman looks awful and begs the characters to free her. So we can talk around the table. What's going on here? First of all, how far are we from town? Does this encounter make sense? If we're not that far from the village, makes perfect sense. If we're 3 hexes, so 18 or more miles away from town, well, obviously that wouldn't make much sense, and you re-roll on the table. But it may, because that may also indicate that there's a village not far from the location where she's tied, in which case they know that in just a little ways, maybe a quarter of a mile, half a mile, or maybe even a mile, that they're going to get to another village or a small settlement or whatever that might be, right? So that gives you a way to do those road encounters while you're traveling along. You can also use BFRPG. If you look here on page, it's 144 through 146. So BFRPG has wilderness encounters. Again, at the top, desert or barren, grassland, inhabited territory, jungle, mountain or hill, ocean, river or riverside, swamp, woods or forest. Okay, so you have an encounter chart right there for you to use, and then you roll 2d8 to determine what that encounter is. And by the way, in our tile adventures, we don't usually balance encounters based on character level. That's a 5th edition thing. That's a Pathfinder 2nd edition thing. I really don't care for that. And we're not playing the sheets. We're just playing characters, playing tile adventures, and having fun. If somebody dies and you can't bring them back, that's okay. You just put that little sheet away. It's very uncomplicated, and you pull out another little sheet that you've created, or you take a break at the table for the moment and do whatever it is you want to do while they're on break, while that person creates a new character, and you wander across them in the wilderness, and you have the encounter. So then you go across and you might use these tables here. Also, if you had that particular situation where you were trying to do disaster relief in that particular village, here at the bottom of page 146 in the BFRPG book, you have encounters during the day and encounters at night that are possible here as you are going about doing your disaster relief while you're in this town. Maybe it's in the town you're in, or maybe it's in the town you go to. And you might have a day encounter or a night encounter. And that, again, is rolled on 2d6. Now, there's a last option that we might use for encounters while we're out in the wild. And you saw it a minute ago when I was in our 1st edition Dungeon Master's Guide, page 184. And let's say you're out in the wilds and you're walking through and traveling through in the forest. You would roll percentile dice if you have an encounter, and you would look down on the chart. So a 14 would tell you that, whoa, you are going to have an encounter with a dragon. Your first level, you're going to run. But depending on your level, you might have an encounter with a dragon. And then it could be that the dragon's just flying by, doesn't seem to see you. Those would be checks that you would roll for the dragon. You would determine his reaction to you or this situation, or whether or not he's disinterested or whatever. And then whether or not he even sees your party members, you give them bonuses for terrain. For example, if they're in the forest, maybe they're covered by the canopy as he flies by. There are a bunch of different scenarios that you could talk through around the table and use to maybe avoid that encounter. So that would be one of the ways in which you would do encounters. So then once we get to an encounter, all right, so let's say we have that encounter, we're going to go back to the BFRPG book, and we're going to go right here. And the first thing we're going to do is on page 43, we're going to see the section here on surprise. It says, when surprise is possible, roll 1d6 for each side which might be surprised. Most normal characters are surprised on a roll of 1 to 2. Surprise characters are unable to act for 1 round. Characters or creatures which are well hidden or prepared to perform an ambush roll a 1 through 4 on a d6. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is we're going to roll for surprise. Then after we roll for surprise in that encounter, then we're going to go to the right side table here, and we're going to determine what is the reaction of the monster that we encounter, or NPC, for example. So maybe it's an immediate attack, maybe it's unfavorable, maybe it's favorable, maybe it's very favorable. Okay, and we're going to adjust these. As it says here, you're going to roll 2d6, and then you're going to add the charisma bonus of the lead character, along with any other adjustments that I might feel, or we might feel at the table, that are reasonable. So sometimes, especially if it's an NPC, we might say, well, we're all walking together, so let's average out our charisma bonuses. And as long as it's a bonus, we'll add that to the die roll, and we'll continue to do that as we parlay or role play the situation together. If it's a monster, we might end up doing the same thing. So we're going to roll that monster encounter reaction, and then we're going to proceed accordingly. So, for example, if we roll and no encounter is indicated, then we're just going to continue to explore, right? if we roll and there is an encounter indicated, then we're going to roll on that surprise table, and then we're going to roll on that reaction table for whatever it is that we encounter. Now, as I showed you before, Matt Davids has this particular table as well in his book, just like in the Table Fables 2 book had that particular table here on road encounters and travel encounters, right on page 20 of Table Fables 2. Okay, Matt Davids also has one. So it's on page 38, 39, 40, and even 41. Okay, so we'll go to page 38 here, and this will stay within our forest terrain environment. So here are forest terrain encounters. Okay, so let's say we roll a 26. What we have here is a puddle of blood. Okay. So, do you have a ranger in the party or someone else in the party who's able to follow tracks? Maybe if you don't have a ranger in the party, maybe one of your characters or all of your characters together could just roll 1d6, and on a 1 and a 2, if they're anything other than an elf, if they are an elf, then they would roll a 1, 2, or 3. And that's from BFRPG book here. That would be their ability to see things or notice things, and they would roll, and they might be able to follow the tracks. Maybe that pool of blood is from something. Maybe it's draining from somewhere. So this is, again, a discussion thing that's around the table that was generated by that random table for that particular thing to investigate. So then the next thing that we might do is if there is an area indicated, okay? So if you go here to Table Fables and you go to page 19, or I mean page 19 starting, and you might say that there's an area indicated. So 10 to 15 on this particular table says road event or encounter, okay? And you might roll on here and you might end up with encountering a particular place. So the characters encounter a landmark. So we're going to see the landmark table on page 23. So then we go to that landmark table and we roll a D100. And they stumble through the woodlands, and what they end up finding, for example, is a staircase, if we rolled a 12. And it says, long before anyone can remember, or for reasons historians cannot understand, a massive staircase was carved into the side of the largest mountain in the region. The stairs are a half a mile wide and stretch from the foothills up to the mountain's very peaks. Few pilgrims brave the stairs, and many give up or go mad before they reach the top. Aha! So that's the start of an incredibly rich adventure, right? You have these massive stairs. Maybe you've seen them from miles and miles away, right? And you've been trekking through the forest and you've seen these stairs and you've decided you want to go and begin to traverse up these stairs. So then you would have characters traverse in that direction accordingly. So then here's what you would do, for example. So let's say at the base of those stairs, it's indicated that there is a tomb-like structure or a mound, a cairn, something like that, where you have to go into this structure to come out to begin to hit those stairs on the other side, right? So let's say you start out, and what we do is this is the tile part of the tile adventures. So we would pull out a starting tile. Let's say we're going to enter this tomb, okay? Maybe we turn it this way, and this indicates the entry of the tomb. So we're going to have our characters right here at the entrance with our miniatures. This is when we're going to break out our miniatures at this point in the game. And we're going to break these out, and like I showed in the last video, we're going to start in any direction you want to start this tile. These tiles are from, this one is from Temple of Elemental Evil board game. There's also some from Wrath of a Shardalon board game that we're going to use as we travel along. So you would enter the tomb or enter this underground cairn or broken down complex with the stairs leading down into it or whatever it might be. And then you're going to progress down into that. So that what happens then is now you'll bring out your stacks of these particular dungeon tiles. And you would then progress down into it. You would first roll for an initial encounter in the entry area. Now, you'll notice on these, they have different different little triangular shapes. In the directions, it tells you, for the board game, it tells you what those particular triangles mean. But maybe while you're playing, those triangles or those symbols might mean something special depending on what you roll. Okay, so you would start down into here, and the first thing you would do is you would roll on your d6 a 1 and a 2. In this case, a 1, 2, and a 3, because this is maybe a dangerous area for a random encounter. You would then roll on the required table or requisite table for what that encounter might be. You would have that particular encounter, whatever it might be, if anything, and you would progress forward. As soon as you begin to progress forward, we would roll 1d20 around the table. Whoever got the highest would be able to be the first person to pick. That person would then help us progress by taking these tiles here, and they would pick one. These were all randomized beforehand, so they'd pick one and they would turn it over, and then they would place it wherever they want to as a connector to continue this. So let's say they decide, this is the direction we're going to be able to head in now. So the party moves there forward. If you can't see them, each one of these tiles have 5-foot squares already on them, so it makes it perfect for movement. So then you would progress into the next section, and we would continue that, and we would roll encounters. Maybe these X's indicate that those are encounters. Maybe these triangles indicate those are traps or special areas. Maybe these triangles indicate that it's descending down. Maybe that's ascending upward. Maybe that's a decline, and maybe that's an incline. Or you could ignore all of those symbols in their entirety. Either way, once you progress through here and you continue to add different tiles to the particular setup, let's say you do have an encounter here on these X's, and maybe they're goblins or kobolds or something like that. You kill those creatures, well then naturally maybe those creatures are going to have treasure. So once we do that, we will pull out our good old trusty first edition Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. And any creature that is indicated in the back of the trusty Monster Manual, if you go into the very back on page 105 of the first edition Monster Manual, you have treasure type tables. Okay? And that tells you that the creature, okay, so let's say you encountered a lizard man, their treasure type is indicated as D. So you would go back to treasure type D, and you would roll your percentile dice across the table, 1 to 8,000 copper pieces at 10% chance, 15% for silver, etc. across the table. Okay? And that would be your treasure for your creatures. Now, BFRPG monsters also have, as you can see here, treasure type. So let's go to that same creature in BFRPG. A lizard man has treasure type D. Okay, so then you would go back here in the BFRPG book, and you would turn back to page 130 here, and you would have treasure tables. You would go to D, 30% chance of hundreds of coppers, 4d6 times 100, etc., all the way across the table. Now, here's the fun thing that we also do. If you have an encounter with a creature or something like that, and that particular creature has treasure, and you're going to roll on that chart across that chart like that to determine what that treasure is. Let's say it indicates that you did find some magical items. And it tells you, like, let's say you find 1d4 magical items. Then, one of the things we always like to do, because this is a wonderful book also by Madeline Hale, and it's really thick, as you can see. It's Arcane Artifacts and Curious Curios. And Madeline Hale's Arcane Artifacts and Curious Curios has over 400 pages here. If you count about the author, it's 413. But as far as actual game information, it is 410 pages, right? So that is huge. and it's really fun. Okay, so you have a particular treasure type. So if the treasure indicates jewelry, for example, on that treasure table, then you can roll here to determine the jewelry. Maybe it's clothing items. Maybe it's armor. Okay. Maybe it's a weapon. Maybe it's a book, a journal, or a scroll, a potion, food and drink, tools and equipment and household objects, containers, trinkets and knickknacks, miscellaneous. Okay, and all of these are really, really cool. I want to show you one on page 132, which is one of my favorites that I like to have us find just for fun for the fighters in the party is a swords table. And you roll on 1d20, and let's say you roll on that 1d20, and that indicates this first blade here. This is the Sentient Sword of the Soldier, St. Lawrence, or Sir Lawrence. It's a noble blade of heavy steel. This sword is possessed by the soul of Sir Lawrence, an honorable knight who will give the user aid while battling evil-aligned creatures. However, Lawrence is proud and will refuse to fight in anything except honorable combat. History. Sir Lawrence was once a prestigious knight who lived hundreds of years ago. He dedicated his life to protecting the king and stayed by his side always. When the time came for the king to ride into battle, Lawrence rode with him. The battle was hard fought, but in the end they were outnumbered, and Lawrence perished, with the king following soon after. So what an interesting little fun story for a particular sentient sword. Now it's a sentient sword, so you're going to roll what a sentient sword consists of. You can do that in the first edition DMG. If you wanted to do that, there are tables for that. Or you can just roll randomly on 3d6. What is its intelligence? What is its wisdom? What language or languages does it speak based upon the table of how many languages it might have as indicated by their intelligence, right? And then you would also then randomly generate the alignment of that sword. But in this case, because of the description, it's obviously going to be good because it's fighting against evil. So it's going to be helpful to the characters. Then you might roll randomly in the first edition DMG back in the magic item table section. And in that magic item table section right here, you have swords. Okay? So you would roll percentile dice on this particular table, and that would tell you what kind of sword Sir Lawrence's sword was. Right? You can also roll in a basic fantasy. That particular book has those kinds of tables as well. And you would roll the pluses of that sword or special powers if it had any things of that nature, right? And that's just a fun way to add unique and fun items into that treasure. Also, I believe it's Table Fables. Yes, Table Fables Chapter 5 has loot. Okay, so those are fun things too. You have a loot type. So let's say you find creatures, let's say you find random rooms without anything really in them as is indicated by them. And just for example, what I mean by writing random rooms with just stuff in there is if you go to page 158 in the Basic Fantasy RPG book, great place to just randomly determine, is there something in this room? Page 158. Here's a table right here. It's in the section called Stalking the Dungeon, but I use it when we play all the time as far as, is there something in the room? And you roll percentile dice. 0, 1 to 16 is empty. 17 to 20 is unguarded treasure. 21 to 60 is a monster. 61 to 84 is a monster with treasure. 85 to 88 is special. 89 to 96 is trap. And 97 to 100 is trap with treasure. So when you see, like I said a minute ago, these triangles, these different shapes or X's, you could easily roll right here on this table and say, oh, that one is a special. I wonder what that special might be. Okay, and then a special could be a puzzle of some sort, such as a door that can only be opened by a combination hidden elsewhere, or an oracle that answers questions, a classic magical fountain. Okay, it gives you some ideas here in the book itself. Or maybe that triangle is in fact a trap, or maybe it's a trap, but it has treasure. Okay, so then you're going to roll here if you would like to do that, and we do a lot, on the loot table. Okay, pocket filler, tools, various other things here in the book. And then you can roll the condition that it's in. And then if it's a pocket filler, for example, let's say you find a broken silver chain. You would determine how much it's worth. Let's say you find coins. This tells you how many. Or gems. This tells you how many, like for an unguarded treasure or unguarded loot, or maybe a monster treasure if you didn't want to roll on those monster treasure tables over there, right? Maybe it's a magical item. You turn to page 48, magical items. You'd roll on a d20. And here's number 18, a large iron needle decorated with elegant lines. When balanced on a fingertip or on a leaf floating in water, the needle will point to the most valuable object within a 5-mile radius. Really, really cool little descriptive items that you could have there as an indicator of things that you find in your treasure. And we add those all the time. Okay, some of the last things I want to say. We will often also use, because it's easier and it's faster, and I have my tablet up while we're playing on a regular basis. I'll always have my tablet usually propped up on the table, and we will have Donjon on there. If you haven't seen that particular website, Donjon is really cool with all kinds of random things that are on the left-hand side of that particular website. If you go to Donjon, and you type that into Google, Donjon, you'll come up easily with the first hit on the list will be the thing that you want. They have all kinds of random generation things that you can do on the right, and then put in your parameters, and then hit generate, and it'll generate towns, villages, names, place names, places or locations and areas, NPCs, monsters, terrain, weather, all those kinds of things that'll randomly generate for you, and you could not be flipping through books and use that for a lot of things as well. And you can tell it what system, if it's 5e or whatever type of system it is that you're using, you could tell it a system type to use, and that will, Donjon will generate that. So we will use Donjon for things like that when we're traveling along. In particular, we use that to generate towns or villages, like notable shops, NPCs, if we're not using these books, maybe for a quest or a side trek from them. We might use, sometimes we might pull up Book of Layers 1 or Book of Layers 2 from old school, or we might use a Kobold's a particular product that might have some little side quest encounters in there. Whatever you have lying around. If you have old modules, you might pile them all up, count how many they are, roll a random die to determine which module you're going to open to, figure out how many pages it has, and roll and see what page it is, and then count how many paragraphs are in there, and roll how many paragraphs down you're going to indicate, and then that particular paragraph is the one that you're going to read from as the thing that you encountered, the thing that you're going to do. So there are so many different ways to do the sandbox random generation and have this fun together. And I will say that when we talk around the table as a family, when we're playing, we're all just spewing out minutia of cool, fun ideas that are brought up by these random tables. Okay, so like that pin and that needle, it's brought up and it's giving you direction and treasure information. Maybe that's the key thing that leads you out of this catacomb crypt area to the exit to those half-mile wide stairs that you can see off on that mountainside in the distance that no one's been able to get to. You would never come up with that on your own, maybe, but because of the table rolls, that's what got you that minutia to start sharing around the table. And we have been so surprised at all of the different connectors from various encounters and locations and creatures and treasures, quests or side tracks that actually turn into impetuses for our continuing adventures. It's really our family sandbox hex crawl. Like I said, we just call it Tile Adventures, but it gives us all a chance to play together and use all these different wonderfully cool items to be able to do this together as a family. We'll use monsters out of the field guide. Like I said, we'll use Monster Manual 1 from first edition. We'll use all of Matt David's different random tables here. We'll use, of course, Basic Fantasy. I love that. RPG there. We'll use Table Fables 1, 2, and 3. And, of course, we'll use Whitebox for simplicity on a bunch of different things. If we have spellcasters in the party, we might just use spell casting and spell lists from Whitebox. That makes it really simple and easy, easy to understand. Each of your spells are like a little single paragraph entry, for example. Or we might decide we want some more variety and have some spells from the original game kind of thrown in there in a way. So maybe we want a basic fantasy RPG. Our first level magic user would like to actually have magic missile. So magic missile would be indicated there. Basic fantasy also has, everything is free to download, of course, as you know from my other videos at basicfantasy.org. They also have a Librum Magica in their downloads section that has a whole lot more spell lists. There's other classes that are indicated there from Basic Fantasy RPG. So these are all the ways in which we do this. These are all the ways in which all of those images I showed you on that short a while back now, how all of these actually tie together with one another. In other words, what do they all have in common? What they all have in common for us is that this is the way we do our hex crawl for our family and our family tile adventures. Do they all have anything else in common? No, beyond the fact that they're used for gaming, of course, but otherwise, that's what they have in common for us. So I hope you really have liked this particular video. I know it's gone really long compared to my other ones, but I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been something that's helped to inform you, give you some ideas of things you might want to purchase and pick up. I think what I might do in videos coming up here is I might actually take some of these books and maybe some of these books, and I might actually flip through and kind of let you look at a little bit more detail of what are in some of these particular books together and cover those together. We'll see what comes on down the line, but it's been a while since I produced a video, so I thought I would put this one together for you. It's not very easy for me to do table top-down shots, but I'll try to do those as much as I can to help you out, to get you to see what it is I'm doing. And I hope again that you've enjoyed the video. Hope you hit the like button, the subscribe. Please be welcome to comment. Again, this is totally G-rated on this channel on a constant basis, so I patrol that very heavily. If you post anything that's not G-rated, I will delete that. We're totally apolitical. We don't talk about that mess. We don't talk about the social junk. I'm not going to get involved in arguing back and forth or talking back and forth about the junk that's going on in the RPG industry right now. It's just a mess. I just want to play old gaming and have fun with that, and that's the real point. I'm not going to buy into agenda. We're not going to talk about that in any way, shape, or form. I get rid of all of that junk from my games and my conversation too. It's just about gaming and having fun together, and that's it. And I hope that's the way it is for you around your tables as well. But irregardless of that, that's what my channel is about. So again, I hope you've liked this. I hope you've been entertained by it. I hope there's been something here that's given you some ideas, some things you might want to pick up and purchase. These are really great. Please consider those. Again, thank you very much. Thank you for all those who have subscribed, and I hope you have a great day. And like I always say, hey, may all your rolls be nat 20s. Take care. Bye.